Go for it. You're ready.
Okay, so first of all, hello from Ireland, and a huge thank you to Bounce English, Melanie and Amy for this event. Fantastic inclusive event because it's for teachers and students. You don't often get that, and it's a community event because of the charities that are involved as well. So thank you very much for that. I'm Julie.
I'm Emma. Hi.
And we feel that an event like this is, more and more important for that solidarity as well of coming together, talking about different topics and aspects. So we're going to be talking to you about dealing with sensitive cultural issues in the classroom to enhance intercultural sensitivity, but ultimately what we're talking about is really what is termed transformative learning.
So I am going to talk about the theory bit. So I'm going to be talking about a research project that I did for my MA dissertation in King's, along with many more of you, exploring teachers' attitudes towards dealing with sensitive issues in the classroom.
I'm going to be talking about how Emma's project actually inspired what I did in the classroom, and looking at practical examples of transformative learning and incorporating social justice issues in the classroom.
So this project that I did was actually in 2015, and it was focused on current affairs of the day in many ways. So in loads of ways, it's outdated now. At the time, the issues being talked about were things like Islamophobia, not that that's gone or anything, but the issues that we're dealing with at the moment, like for instance Black Lives Matter, just seem so important at the moment, and I think they're impossible to ignore in the classroom, and I think it's really important that teachers are equipped to deal with them in a kind of a sensitive way and to be able to approach them in a sensitive way. So I've just brought up here a few issues that have come up over the last few years that I would say can be difficult to avoid. So maybe as we're going through this, you can just reflect a little bit on how these potentially sensitive social justice issues are approached or have been approached in your language classroom, if at all.
And what you'll see central to this, that I think as well is the fundamental is that equipping teachers with dealing with these topics, I think is very much an issue that Emma will explore.
And of course, feel free to use the chat box as we're going through as well, although we can't see the chat box now, but maybe we can look at it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so first of all, going into the background a little bit, the theoretical framework. So the research question that I started with was, how do teachers approach politically and culturally sensitive issues in multilingual classrooms? So I did a study investigating teachers' beliefs. I did some semi-structured interviews with experienced English language teachers. It was a form of narrative inquiry, which is basically conversation. And the key thing really was that it was language classrooms for adults, and that those classes had no specific content. So it was kind of general English type classes.
And that's where there's the opportunity.
Exactly, there's that space.
We have that in English language teaching, but there's not necessarily the specific content. It's kind of, it can be negotiated.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And as I mentioned previously, it was conducted in 2015. So when I started looking into this, and when I started with, the literature review, and looking at the evidence that there was, what my kind of initial idea was, as a manager and a teacher educator, was to look for ways to support other teachers in dealing with sensitive issues and current affairs in the classroom. And I was hoping to find kind of strategies and tools to kind of equip them. But actually what I found, and maybe it's not that surprising, is that there was actually very little evidence, because very little research, particularly in the English language teaching context, had been done into this area. And when I went back to look at the kind of the teacher education books that we all used when we started our careers in teaching, there was barely any reference to it. At most, kind of one line saying just avoid any controversy, avoid anything sensitive.
I think over the 18 years I've been teaching, I very rarely had conversations around it actually. And I know I'm very institutionalized into like avoid you've got to avoid. Even today, I still feel like that.
Yeah, I think we all are really. But then advocates of critical pedagogy would say, you know, that not necessarily that these things can't be avoided, but that there's no such thing as neutral education. So that education either functions as an instrument to bring about conformity or freedom, and it's kind of one or the other. And that might be a bit heavy right now, but I think that kind of gets back to what we're talking about a little bit, that avoiding is a kind of silencing in some ways.
Yeah, and that because this is not something simple. This is, you know, it's taken time. I'm at the start of this journey of learning about this, so it's exploring what does a neutral education actually practically look like, and so how does that lead to conformity, and what does that mean? And I suppose by not discussing and looking at topics critically, we're not progressing. So that for me is what that kind of conformity means. Yeah.
That said, though, there are of course some kind of registered and researched benefits of approaching these kind of issues. And again, you know, in critical pedagogy, they would say that language teaching is an opportunity for driving real social change and a means of counteracting ethnocentrism, which would include racism and other areas as well. And of course, things that you kind of intuitively know that they can be good for motivation, that it leads to deeper in engagement and fuller self-investment. So there is some evidence of the positive benefits of it. So just going back a little bit to my research questions. So I looked at what topics teachers consider sensitive, their attitudes towards sensitive issues, what strategies they used to handle these issues, and the implications from a teacher education perspective. So I'll just go through these areas briefly now.
Yeah, and I think that actually these questions really cover what needs to be included in teacher education programs, because these are the questions I know that I have, and I think those questions do cover a lot of that.
Yeah. So in terms of the topics that teachers considered sensitive, you might or might not recognize these, and you may wonder why I suddenly have a picture of parsnips up there.
And now I do love a parsnip, I've got to say, chicken and parsnips, but this is a very different context that we're talking about here.
So you may or may not know that parsnips is an acronym used within the publishing world, so within the ELT publishing world, of topics to avoid in course books. To make course books globalized and in some ways inclusive as well. So first P is of course politics, then we've got alcohol, religion, sex and sexuality are put into one category, narcotics. And the last, can you remember? Isms is the next thing. So belief systems, really, I think that's what that boils down to, but also things like racism. And the last one is pork. So as I said, this is an acronym that's used in publishing. It's nothing kind of research based or anything like that. It's just general guidelines that are often used by publishers when they're trying to sell books to a global audience. And they just say to not touch these topics at all, which is one thing for course books. But I guess the question is, what are the implications of this sanitization of course books creeping into classrooms? And
I think there's a need to be aware that we are aware that there's certain contexts where you can't, you know, and in the context you're teaching and where books are sold, that these topics can't be within those materials and they're not allowed. So I think what we're considering is where you can, or where you feel that you can, and where is a safe place to bring these topics. We're not saying that obviously, yes,
that's not that they should be in course books necessarily, but what does that mean for classrooms?
Yeah.
Because what I did find from my interviews was that, going back to the topics, that these are the topics that teachers themselves often cited as the ones to avoid in classrooms. Maybe not so much pork. I mean, whoever is going to be offended by a mention of pork, but the other topics were definitely things that were mentioned by teachers as things that they do tend to avoid. So the next question then related to teachers' attitudes, and the overwhelming and really to my mind, shocking attitude that was uncovered from the teachers was one of fear. And it was a real strong, emotive, visceral sense of fear. And there were legitimate fears because, as Julie said, you know, it's a difficult topic and there can be difficult things. And there were often well-meaning fears as well. So, for instance, the teachers had awareness of being, I don't like using the word politically correct, but I think that was kind of what they were getting at, that they were afraid of coming across as being ethnocentric, that they were kind of coming across as the people who knew, and that they were, you know, teaching the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So that was, and it's not that it's not a legitimate concern, it is, but it was one of the things that stopped them. They were also afraid of students causing offence, of students offending each other. They were afraid of conflict and tension in the classroom, which again is fair enough. We don't want that. We want our classrooms to be safe spaces and we want them to be open. And they were also afraid of letting go of their kind of expert status, that they felt that they needed to be seen sometimes as the experts in the room, even though their area of expertise is English language, not necessarily the content that goes with it. So in terms of strategies then, it's probably, well, unsurprising in some ways, but actually when I did the research, I was quite surprised that it overwhelmingly led to an avoidance strategy. So teachers, very experienced teachers, very confident teachers said that they often avoid topics that they think might be controversial. And that includes kind of everyday topics. So, you know, whatever is going on in the news at the time, which can be such a huge opener of kind of conversation. But if they thought there was anything difficult there, that they did tend to avoid them.
Yeah. And I mean, there are things I know when I first looked at the comments, I thought, I feel every one of those. And that kind of tells me that how socialized and institutionalized I've been coming into these kind of sanitized classrooms.
But the interesting part was through the interviews, so this process of narrative inquiry, which is just a kind of more academic way of saying conversation, the teachers themselves on the whole discovered that those fears and assumptions that they had were mostly unfounded, that they didn't really have any reason to think like that. And when they thought about it, they said, well, really, you know, when I asked them what the worst case scenario was or what was the worst experience that they'd had, they'd said, oh, actually, you know, it never really, you know, if a topic did come up, they'd say, oh, in the end, you know, if there was disagreement, they just agree to disagree, or maybe there was mild tension and quickly do over. But mostly it was more that it was positive experiences, that, oh, it was actually really good to talk about that topic because, you know, it ended up breaking the ice, and they talked about the elephant in the room quite a lot. And what they really found was that they kind of underestimated their learners. They underestimated their resilience and their ability to manage conflict and their emotional intelligence, and the fact, I think in some ways that they were mature adults with lived experiences as well.
I know that's something that again and again, and even now, that I've underestimated responses of students. And I think that underestimating is kind of, you know, not acknowledging that they have agency, they have autonomy, they're equal adults, you know, they're resilient as well. And, you know, I think this is about creating a safe space, which we'll talk about towards the end.
I mean, it's all as well about, it's all coming at, all of this is from a good place. So it's all with all of these teachers, it was really, you know, it was with their students' best interests at heart. That's what the concern was. But what they found was that they had actually, that there were these gaps and they had kind of missed out on things. So the implications briefly from a teacher education perspective was that really, I mean, in a nutshell, it's that more and some teacher education is necessary, because at the moment there isn't really anywhere as far as I know, and I'd happily be corrected on that. But they need it both pre-service and in-service, so before they start teaching, and you know, as they're teaching as well in terms of professional development. That more focus needs to be on transformative learning and on critical cultural awareness. that they need practical support as well.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's a huge area. It's not something, again, that you can just easily just walk in and apply in a classroom. But I think if student and teachers are aware of transformative learning, again, I'm just on the start journey really and learning about it, is that at least then you have a choice and you have an informed choice. You know, you're more empowered as a teacher. You might feel a bit safer because you're informed about it. And you have a choice then that you can negotiate in the
just
classroom.
Equipped with more tools.
Equipped.
And me as well, like as a manager and as a teacher educator, and when teachers come to me and, you know, depending on their experience and stuff like that, you know, I would never say go in all guns blazing into something that you're not comfortable with. It's not about that. It's just about for teacher educators as well, or for managers at least, knowing that knowing that you can support teachers, and for teachers to know that they'll have the support of managers as well.
That's the key. It's the support throughout, isn't it? Okay.
Onto the fun stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the practice side. So as Emma's project really kind of inspired me and got me really thinking about, you know, what topics, why don't I talk about those topics? Because I think they're actually really important. So Emma really started me on that journey, and then most recently I've been involved from October in an Irish teaching and learning funded project with three different universities. It's a social justice project, and it's looking at all disciplines. So we come from various different disciplines, and it's us reflecting on social justice. We're talking about here in this talk about classroom, but it also, I think, is very important for us to question the inequalities that surround us in our systems as well. That's important, and the invisible kind of inequalities that surround what we do that we may not be aware of. What we're talking about here is the classroom. This website is a developing project, and there's blogs, and it's kind of a live ongoing project. But what you'll find is they've put an amazing extensive list of social justice resources together. So this has been hugely influential. And the question they asked us in the first blog, what's the purpose of education, or what does higher education, I work in higher education context, what does that mean to you? And I thought, oh, you know what? I've not really had many conversations about what is the actual purpose. And this quote, I was reading this book, and this quote really summed it up. Is it to perpetuate existing power structures and norms, or equip students with the critical tools to question them? Now, I know that's quite complex, but for me, and I'm still learning about what that really means, but again, it's the kind of conforming. Is it to kind of be neutral and just not progress society by engaging critically with topics, or is it, as it says, to equip students to question them, and this idea of transformative learning is that. So very often, I think when, you know, imposing, I think, is we don't want to impose on our topics onto students. So we often, often we negotiate topics with students to give them a bit of autonomy. And when we often ask them the topics that they want to cover, they might come up with things like, oh, food, and, the topics that we hear all the time. And so in every topic, really, you can kind of bring in try out a different angle of a social justice issue. So business, students are interested in business or professional life. Then, discrimination in the workplace, just introducing the idea is going to be crucial for anybody in their professional life. Travel, you could bring in an element of immigration, and it can be a step-by-step and see how the reactions go with that.
Another thing to do as well is on a daily or a weekly basis or whatever it is, just have a few minutes where it's, talk about the news of the day or the news of the week, and what's going on in the world at the moment. And again, that can open all kinds of cans of worms. But if you're equipped to kind of consciously deal with that, then it can be really useful for everybody, because it can be really practical as well for students.
Yeah, getting them to look at news from their country, seeing the different perspectives and different angles. And also representation. I think representation is really we need to discuss it a bit more, the power of representation. Just personally, I meant the US TV presenter, Ellen DeGeneres. I know there's been a bit of critique of her recently, but I mean, if somebody like Ellen had been on the TV when I was growing up, I might have felt very differently about myself and the way, and who I was. But nobody like her existed on TV when I was 12 and 13 years old. So I think that representation is really, really important. And just even talks, Chimamanda does some great talks, A Dangerous Simple Story, and I've done some work with Grace and Perry on toxic masculinity. And some students are quite shocked to see the different identities that Grayson has, but they've always been willing and interested to look at some of his artwork and what Grayson was all about. So representation is also very key. Just more recently, when I say recently, I mean like 2 weeks ago.
So since everything has been moved online.
Online learning, I had a class I was covering, and they wanted business topics, I was told. So I know this is a whole different, again, teacher education of online, how do we do this, as well as in the classroom, because there's going to be different, feelings if you're doing it online and the students on their own and they've been on their own for a few weeks. It's very sensitive, and we have to be very sensitive about it.
Definitely.
So I was watching this video, and it's about being allies in the workplace, and I thought, that word is really important at the moment, allies. And I started watching the video, and it was about this woman's experience of sexism in the workplace, and it immediately in me, I was going, I have a student who comes from a certain context and community, and it might be difficult for her, to bring up this topic about women, and I said to myself, but just go with it. It's talking about the workplace. Just go with it. And again, I underestimated, and I felt bad for underestimating, because at the end of the video, and we were speaking about it, she said, you know what, these topics are so important. They should be in every education system. They should be taught at a young age. And I just felt so bad that I'd underestimated this student and the context she comes from, because I probably have a single story, as Chimamanda nicely presents in her TED Talk. I had a single story, and I still have those kind of prejudice in me and in institutionalized kind of ways of thinking.
I think, though, it is important to be aware as well. I mean, when you're going into a context of you're teaching online, it's a new group of students, students that you don't know. It really is important to be aware of the things that could the potential pitfalls and things like that. It's just not letting that stop you, and knowing how to navigate it as well, I think, when it does happen.
Yeah, that's it. The sensitivity, the navigate. And if you're not sure, then maybe, and just take time.
Yeah, see how far you can go with it, and
and then this week I felt I had to bring up the topic of racism with my students because of the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. So I found a short video, some discussion questions about racism, and at the end of the session, two of the students did say that they felt that it was really important to discuss this because they're watching about it. Some of them come from contexts where it's, it's a part of their daily life. It's a part of where they come from. And they said that most importantly, that it was really important that they were equipped with language, that they had the language so that they could discuss these issues with their friends outside the classroom. For example, a couple of students that were still here in Ireland, that they have experience of discussing these issues as well. So I just want to finish up with a project that I was involved in and at the University of Arts London on the foundation programme. It was such a great project and a great opportunity to incorporate transformative learning in the classroom and community. So I'm just going to take you through the project really. And I know that Jo McPhee, who spoke previously, she also has experience of this project. We were working together as well. The first step of the project is that the students get the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, again, I know it might not be easy for certain groups, and this is where it's very difficult, whether you're underestimating or not. But you know, we can always find out what students think as well as they discuss with them. They had to discuss the different rights. They had to come up with examples for each one. They had to discuss human rights issue in their own country. And again, we know that there has to be a little, you know, some caution and sensitivity towards that, and listen to students. And I feel it's very important as well for students, because often they want a language aim. Okay, how does this relate to language? So you could have, you know, for example, a bit of hedging in their critical thinking, might be, appears to be. The second step of the project was they had to select a human rights issue. And again, you could have group discussion of suggesting, agreeing and disagreeing. They had to then create a poster campaign for that issue. And for example, you could focus on language for engaging emotive language, and they presented that campaign through the poster. And again, you could have language for presentations. And then the final product was an exhibition. So the students produced a poster, as you can see on the left-hand side, and then it was open to the public at Amnesty International headquarters, and we all went along. And everybody had to vote on a poster that stood out for them. And as you can see, the poster was then chosen to be printed on T-shirt and were then sold online for charity. So it's a great idea of transformative learning, looking at critical issues. It's coming from the students in terms of what area they go into and choose. So they have a certain amount of agency autonomy there, and then it's for the community. It's giving back to the community, like this event is today. So yeah, it really was a great project there.
Okay, so just to finish up, some, I guess, tips to avoid avoidance and on dealing with these topics in a sensitive way. So start off by allowing students to be cultural informants. So, you know, don't feel the need to position yourself as the expert. Your expertise isn't everything that's going on in the world right now. Your expertise is English language, and your expertise is also being the teacher and able to navigate that, and able to navigating, you know, having a certain amount of control over the conversation as well. Always, of course, encourage critical thinking, so always encourage questioning. I think it's really important to be aware of your bias. Of course, teaching isn't neutral, nothing is neutral. We all come into everything with our preconceptions. So I think it's really, really important to be aware of what your biases are, what your preconceptions are. And from there, you can kind of start making decisions on, okay, are you going to be very upfront about what your opinion is on this? Or are you going to maybe share it later? Or are you going to try not to share it at all? But I think it's important as well to be aware that if you think that you're not sharing it in some shape or form, or if you think that students won't see it, they probably will, because, you know, we're humans, we're not neutral. So just being aware of that and doing whichever way you're approaching it, doing it consciously.
And there is a school of thought that, you know, we're told to not, you know, not put your opinion forward as a teacher. I think that's also it. There is a school of thought that said it's very important to say what your stance is, because, you know, it's hidden otherwise. Could be a bit of a hidden agenda going on.
And it can create a barrier rather than kind of flattening the hierarchy as well.
So really it's about challenging the ideas and not people, but again, that comes from discussions with students and yourself, and really, how do we do that? How do we kind of make sure that we're challenging ideas and not people, and allowing space for multiple perspectives, making language aims clear so they can see that there is a language angle on that, and ultimately creating a safe and brave space. I think it's very important to create those rules, negotiate those rules with students. So what is a safe space? What is a brave space? I know that Melanie from Bounce English, Melanie Johnson, has been doing a lot with trauma principles. So incorporating this kind of teacher education with trauma principles is very, very important. I know also presenting is Caroline McKinnon, who is the founder of a educational organisation for refugee and asylum seekers, that I'm sure has a lot of knowledge around the area of creating safe and brave spaces, and I think that's really key to this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
There's a list of references, and
yeah, wonderful. Hey, one of the questions that did come up was the graphic that you had about human rights was fantastic. I don't know if you have the source of that graphic, but I know Renato was asking if there were.
I will have a look, and shall I email it to you or just post it in the chat?
You can post it in the chat. That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was
amazing. Yeah, thank you guys.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. We're just going to take a very quick break and switch over to our next session. While we do that, I am going to pull up my obligatory slide for us. Please consider, if you are able to, donate money to either your local food bank or time. Time is also a very good thing to donate.